Greetings, and welcome to this brief introduction to Plato's dialogue, The Statesman. Plato's Statesman seamlessly continues the conversation began in Plato's Sophist. Socrates began the discussion with the question, philosopher, statesman, and sophist, are they three or one? The Eleatic stranger continues to lead the conversation, now with Theaetetus's friend, young Socrates. As in the Sophist, the stranger uses the method of division and collection to try to define the statesman. He begins with the position that a statesman is a knower. Statesmanship is no mere knack. Further, he argues that kingly knowledge is commanding. Its theory relates directly to practice. But what does the king command for? Breeding, the breeding of pedestrian, hornless, two-footed animals that mate within the same species, namely humans. What in the world? The result of their divisions is that the stranger says that the king looks a lot like a swineherd. Their method seems to have missed everything distinctive about human statesmanship. So they make another beginning. Rather than divide and collect, the stranger tells a story. According to his myth, the cosmos moves in two different cycles. In the first cycle, the god Kronos ruled as king. He took care of everything. Human beings sprung from Mother Earth with no families or cities. We were born old, gradually grew younger, and finally disappeared back into the soil. We were one family at peace with each other and the other animals. The earth provided all our needs. But eventually Kronos, the god pilot, returned to his lookout to contemplate the whole. He dropped the tiller. The cosmos reversed motion. The cycle of Zeus began. Zeus's cycle starts out good, but it gets worse and worse. Human beings are left to hunger, violence, age, and death. When the universe is about to fall apart, Kronos comes back and straightens the ship, and the first cycle begins anew. Now guess which cycle we're in now. There are many fascinating points in this myth about happiness, philosophy, and talking with animals. But most basically, the myth points out the error in the prior division. They were describing a ruler who differed in kind from the ruled, the way that a human differs from pigs, or the god differs from humans. That is not the case now. We have no god to care for us in this cycle. We're on our own, in particular alone with our mortality. With these points in mind, the stranger returns to the search for the statesman. He suggests that they understand statesmanship by comparing it to the humble art of weaving. But first, he says, they must explain their use of this example by the example of learning to read, in which we compare letters to learn words. It seems that something similar must happen here. They will use the example of weaving to understand statesmanship. It seems an oddly roundabout approach. The stranger goes through many divisions to define weaving. Then he says that this example, like the myth before it, has gone on too long. As a remedy, he recommends that they examine the art of measurement. This art is related to politics, he argues, for in politics greater and less are measured not mathematically, but with respect to what's fitting. Now this is obviously ironic. If they have this much trouble finding due measure in their speeches, just how hard it must be for the statesman to find that measure in deed. From here, they return once more to the search for the statesman. They separate away various other types of arts and would-be statesmen. These also-rans lead the stranger to speak at length about the inferior or imitation regimes. These are monarchy, aristocracy, democracy, oligarchy, and tyranny. In other words, they're all the regimes that we are used to in practice. What makes them inferior is that they do not rule by knowledge. Rather, they proclaim their legitimacy on the basis of things like law, popular will, or the consent of the governed. None of these are legitimate claims, the stranger argues, compared with knowledge. In fact, he says that the best rule would be for a prudent person to sit beside each of us and tell us what to do. The stranger's critique of actual regimes clarifies what we may have suspected all along, that the rule of the true statesman is impossible in practice. Where would we find all these wise men to sit by our sides all day? Why would they be willing to do so? Who would put up with them? This would literally be a nanny state. This realization should cause us to question the stranger's conclusion, in which he says that the true statesman will weave together the virtues, courage, and moderation, first in the best citizens' souls by education, and then by weaving these citizens together through marriage, using a marriage scheme based on knowledge, not choice. Unsurprisingly, he says nothing of the objections that the livestock, the citizens, may have to this breeding scheme. So what are we to make of this dialogue, which starts by likening the king to a swineherd, offers a disheartening myth, indulges in an ill-measured treatment of measurement, and concludes with an ironic description of the true king and imitative regimes? First, it must make us doubt the possibility of a truly rational politics. The so-called philosopher king seems as mythical as Kronos. But at the same time, it may allow us better to appreciate the longings inherent in politics. Longings that lead citizens to busy themselves with such things as marriage, morals, and myths. All human beings long for wholeness, consciousness of our incompleteness, and longing for more makes us different than swine. Appreciating this reality may be the point that links the statesman and the philosopher, even if the kinds of wholeness that most people pursue fall very short of the God who drops the tiller to contemplate the whole. Thank you for joining this brief introduction to Plato's Statesman. I'm Keith Whitaker from Wise Counsel Research.